One of the darkest parts of the history of Africa is that part where human beings were forcefully captured from across the nooks and crannies of Africa and sold out in slavery to European traders in exchange for some inconceivable items like salt, pepper, iron bars, clothes, then guns, and other items that were the available instruments of trade by barter at the time. It was a barbaric phase in the history of Africa. The captured persons were moved in chains from their homes, moved on foot across several kilometers to the nearest water body where the journey continued by sea. The European traders had the habit of building castles which served as dungeons for the warehousing of the captured persons pending the arrival of ships from Europe. One of such places for the keeping of slaves pending the arrival of ships is a place known as Elmina Slave Castle. It is located at Cape Coast, Ghana. It has been reported in history that Elmina was the first concrete structure to be built in Africa for the warehousing of slaves. In this edition of Back in History, we take you back in time to the dark, barbaric history of Elmina Slave Castle. Welcome to this edition of Back in History. Elmina is a community in Cape Coast in the Republic of Ghana. It is a naturally beautiful place, sandwiched by the Atlantic Ocean, with water tumbling freely across the horizons every second and every minute of the day. It is indeed a beautiful place to behold. Recorded history has shown that Elmina has been this beautiful from creation. Its beauty attracted the European traders, and its closeness to the sea made it the more attractive for the emerging trade in humans. Thus, in 1481, the King of Portugal took a decision to build a castle in Elmina in order to ensure the protection of Portuguese interest and trade. The recently crowned King João II sent all of the materials needed to build the fort on 10 caravans and 2 transport ships. The supplies, which included everything from heavy foundation stones to roof tiles, were sent in pre-fitted forms along with provisions for 600 men. Under the command of Diego de Azambuja, the fleet set sail on 12 December 1481 and arrived at Elmina. Upon arrival, Azambuja contracted a Portuguese trader who had lived in Elmina for some time to arrange and interpret an official meeting with the local chief, Kwame Nansa. Azambuja told the chief of the great advantages in building a fort, including protection from the very powerful King of Portugal at the time. Chief Kwame Nansa, while accepting Azambuja as he had any other Portuguese trader who arrived on his coast, was skeptical about the erection of a permanent settlement in Elmina by foreign power. Unknown to him, the Portuguese were already determined to erect the castle at all costs, no matter the opposition. Chief Ansa was warned of the consequences of his resistance, which included deportation to a foreign land. Without any further spending of time, the construction work commenced in earnest. In order to build the fort in the most defensive position on the peninsula, the Portuguese had to demolish the homes of some of the villagers which were already in existence around the place earmarked for the erection of the castle. The nearby rock was also demolished, and the stones derived therefrom were used for the construction of the castle. The rock that was broken was the place of traditional worship for the people of Elmina, who were predominantly animists. The demolition was done without prior consultation and compensation, and in response to this, the local people forged an attack that resulted in several Portuguese deaths. Continued opposition led to the Portuguese to burn down the local village in retaliation. Eventually, an understanding was reached and peace was restored. Even in this tense atmosphere, the first story of the tower was completed after only 20 days. This was the result of having brought so much prefabricated building material to Elmina from Portugal. The remainder of the fort and an accompanying church were completed soon thereafter, despite resistance, and standing before the very eyes of the locals in just a few weeks was an imposing first of its kind edifice known as Elmina Castle. Upon its completion, Elmina was established as a proper city. Azambuja was named governor, and King Jao added the title Lord of Guinea to his noble titles. There was increase in trading activities between the locals and Portuguese traders. The population of Elmina swelled, with traders from other towns relocating to Elmina and hoping to trade with the Portuguese, who gradually established a West African trade monopoly. Gold mining was carried on in the area from day to day by the Portuguese merchants, and several carats of gold were taken abroad from Elmina, and the castle served as the major warehouse and transit point to Europe. This was the case for many years, but the situation was later going to change from trading in goods to trading in human beings, and Elmina Castle was to serve as a critical transit point for trade in humans. By the 17th century, most trade in West Africa concentrated on the sale of slaves, and Elmina Castle acted as a depot where enslaved Africans were brought in from different kingdoms in West Africa. The Africans, often captured in the African interior by the slave catchers of coastal peoples, were sold to Portuguese and later to Dutch traders in exchange for goods such as textiles and horses, salts, paper, and other inconceivable items. These human beings were brought in chains across the sea and emptied into the Elmina Castle, where they were kept for several weeks in dark cells, otherwise called dungeons. These cells were originally built for the warehousing of goods such as gold, and for this reason, the cells had no windows for ventilation and sunlight. When the times changed from trading in goods to trading in humans, the cells were not redesigned to allow for the provision of windows for fresh air. The cells remained the same. They lacked ventilation and sunlight, and this is where the captured humans were kept, awaiting the arrival of ships from Europe. These ships then conveyed them to Europe and the New World in America, where they were sold out in slavery to work tirelessly in slave plantations and other places where their services were required. Elmina Castle soon became the envy of other European forces, and in 1596, the Dutch made their first attempt to capture and take over the castle. This was fiercely resisted by the Portuguese, and the Dutch were defeated in their attempt. The castle was then fortified with cannons mounted at the top of the building and around the castle to forestall future attacks. In 1637, however, the Dutch launched another attack and succeeded in capturing the castle, and upon capturing the castle, the Dutch used it extensively for slave trade. In 1872, the Dutch Gold Coast, including the Elmina Castle, became a possession of the British government. The British remained in control of the castle for several years and also used the castle for the transatlantic slave trade till the abolition of slave trade. Before the abolition, thousands of enslaved Africans had been brought into the Elmina Castle and kept here under the most inhuman and most horrendous situations. Some died while staying in the cells, and history has it that their bodies were thrown into the nearby sea for the water bodies to feed on. In 1957, Ghana, then known as Gold Coast, gained independence from Britain, and all British possessions in the territory, including the Elmina Castle, became the property of the new country. Ghana then embarked on massive renovation of the castle in its bid to preserve same for historical purpose. The castle has become a tourist site till this day, with thousands of tourists from around the world visiting the edifice from January to December of every year. Yours truly also took a trip to the castle in April 2024. It is an imposing edifice to behold. It is massive and it is made up of many rooms and many cells. It also has a church in the courtyard of the castle. It is stated that the slave merchants worshipped in the said church and even had resident priests posted to the castle from Europe to administer the gospel to the merchants. Enslaved Africans were not allowed into the chapel. The irony of the chapel is that while the slave dungeons were on the ground floor, the chapel was on the first floor, just on top of the cells. Today, Elmina is preserved as a Ghanaian National Museum. In 1979, the castle was redesignated as a World Heritage Monument by UNESCO. It is a place of pilgrimage for many African Americans seeking to connect with their roots. Elmina Castle is indeed a place deeply rooted in the history, and the history of slavery and suffering in Africa cannot be complete without the mention of Elmina Slave Castle. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to the channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host Ekemini, wishing you the best of time as you continue to accompany me across the vast historical narratives of Africa and of the world.